Good afternoon, everyone. This is Arif Qureshi. I'm the managing principal at ICS. And again, thank you for joining our COVID Convo. This is the 14th COVID Convo that we'll be doing. And I think you'll find it really interesting because we are doing a little bit of a deeper dive around the impact of COVID on learning and really some of the intervention strategies that can be put in place. I know 2020 has been a pretty tough year for everyone. We've got COVID issues. I think yesterday across the U.S. We had about 120,000 infections, which is the highest rate so far. As you all know, we've got a number of executive orders coming out from the governor, and really we're also dealing with some of the national election issues going forward. So, well, I can't wait till 2020 is over, hopefully on a positive tone, but we'll just have to wait and see. Again, as I mentioned, a lot of good stuff to cover today. We'll have Fred Nolan talk a little bit about the update from MDE along with the executive order and some MDH summary of academic studies on learning loss. We'll also, as always, have the three school districts, Bemidji, Morite, and East Central, where they will go into a little bit more information around learning results. And then Neil Carlson from the University of Minnesota talking about teaching resources and some of the updated transmission information that he has. And we'll end with Todd Rapp as a communication update. Just a reminder again that we do have one last COVID Convo plan for November 20th. So if you get a chance, please join in for that also. Again, that'll be held from 12 to 1 p.m. And as always, if you have any questions or comments, shoot them in the chat and we'll make sure we get that answered. So with that, I'll pass it on to Fred.
Well, thank you, Arif. And as most of you know, the governor came out with an executive order 2094 yesterday. I understand there's been a slight course correction that came out today in 2095. But this was kind of a surprise that he directs that there be 30 minutes of teacher preparation to provide instruction for planning for instruction for distance learning and hybrid. And I believe the three districts that are on the call use Wednesdays for that purpose, and many districts across the state are doing that, so that may not be as big a change as it may be for some districts that are not doing something like that. He also talks about prioritizing students with special needs who services cannot be provided through distance learning, and finally, strongly discourages schools and charters from reporting students for truancy. Now, you can find all this in the planning guide by scrolling up and down and looking for those gray sections. You'd think there was a better way to do that, but that's how you have to do it. Or you can click on that summary where I've put together a blog with some of the summary and where you find some of the changes. And again, there's a new one out today, and there was a superintendent conference call just a little while ago. The McKinsey company, which does consulting and a lot of economic studies, in June released a pretty devastating report talking about that the students that are caught up in the pandemic now and are not receiving the normal school instruction, they could see as on average a 2.2% reduction in earnings. Now that's between $60,000 and $85,000 they're estimating by 2040, because all of these young people will be in the workforce by then. But they made some critical assumptions. One, that distance learning at best would deliver 50% of expected learning, and 28 states don't require distance learning, so there's 28 states where they may not be getting any learning at all. The pandemic, they think, is going to last 12 to 14 months. They could be very right on that. We may not be back in regular school yet this school year. And they're also saying that Black, Hispanic, and low-income students are more likely to receive low quality or no distance learning, and actually they'll see larger learning losses. I did a blog on that a couple days ago, so if you go to the link on the summary and look for my other blogs, it'll be there, plus it's on the ICS website. But that's why I'm so interested in hearing from these three districts what evidence they have about the learning, and are we seeing that big a loss as nationally McKinsey is suggesting. I think you'll be quite pleased that these districts are reporting a loss, but not nearly as significant, and taking some strong interventions. So with that, we're going to start with Tim Lutz from Bemidji with some good news.
Thank you, Fred. Good afternoon, everyone. Tim Lutz, Superintendent in Bemidji. In the midst of all that's going on, it's hard to find sometimes some good news. It's all relative, I guess. Our COVID numbers are continuing to climb in Beltrami County with over 224 active cases right now. And 62.04 was the current 14-day rate that was released yesterday. Today, just a few minutes ago, it was updated, and now we're at 69. So it's growing exponentially right now. Another piece of news that's not good is that our operating referendum failed. We're in good company, though, throughout Minnesota. We're one of about 50% or more than 50% of school districts that had an operating referendum that failed, along with bond referendums. So it's just a tough time to go out to the community and ask for additional funding. But in the midst of all of this, there really is some good news to share. And what I'd like to share is that there still is a real burgeoning area of support on behalf of the community. We have had quite a few people express their sadness and their frustration that the referendum did not pass. And basically, in a nutshell, it's a grassroots movement right now where some people have posted on social media that they were disappointed, that they believe that the future of our community starts with our school district. And they say great things about our school district. And even though the referendum failed, this is a snapshot or a screenshot of what one parent said. And she actually happens to be the director of a local charter school. And her name is Adrienne Eichmann, and I want to really thank her for that. She occasionally sits in on these meetings, actually, but she voiced the opinion that she's taking a look at what the amount would have been, that her taxes would have increased, and she's going to write a check and submit that to the district to support the district, and she's encouraging and challenging other members of the community to do so. The newspapers called me about this, a local radio station has called me about this. It's gaining traction, and we'll take whatever we can get. But I mostly appreciate this outpouring of support from the community. Moving on to the next slide, this is really exciting. I asked our high school video class to come up with a message asking the community to rally behind schools and masking up and doing what we need to do to get the COVID numbers down in our county. And so if Aaron could run that, I can show you how well and how professionally this message was created in this PSA.
2020 has been the year of change and overcoming challenges. A lot has been lost this year, a lot can still be saved, but we need your help.
If we want things back to normal, the only way to accomplish that is one step at a time.
That first step is wearing a mask. Here at Bemidji High School, we wear our masks so we can stay in school.
I wear a mask to protect my classmates.
I mask up because it's the right thing to do.
I mask up for my ancestors.
We mask up so we can do homecoming.
I mask up so we can have a normal high school graduation.
When you wear a mask,
you're not only protecting yourself and others,
you're protecting the community.
You're protecting Bemidji.
Here in the community, we mask up to protect each other.
I wear a mask to protect my fellow firefighters.
I mask up for the police officers.
I mask up so I can keep my business open.
Mask up, Bemidji.
I mask up so my players can have a season.
Mask up, Bemidji!
As a nurse in Bemidji, I wear my mask to protect my patients.
It's important to not only take your health into consideration, but everyone else's as well.
I'm doing what I can to prevent the spread of COVID-19.
We need each and every one of you to help us in saving what's left of 2020, as well as 2021.
All it takes is a mask.
Mask up for the students,
Teachers,
businesses,
Employees,
sports, and most importantly, family.
The only way to overcome this is by working together.
Thank you, Aaron. I'm so proud of those students. I get a little choked up no matter how many times I see that. It's a wonderful message, and they did it in such a strong and powerful way with a theme. Those two boys meeting each other out in front of the school, and then reaching out beyond that, the theme of the greater community. I also appreciate the fact that they have the flag in there several times, the American flag. It is not something that is a political symbol. It is our flag. And that's powerful. It's a powerful way to give students a voice and to empower them with a message through which I believe and I hope the community can rally behind our school district and our students. We also have 2 one-minute radio PSAs that are playing at 5 different radio stations. So the message is getting out there. Now I want to get into the information a little bit that we'll talk about how we are doing with our academics and some of the slide that we are experiencing. And as Fred alluded to, we are seeing some slide, but we're not seeing as much as we thought we would. We are a district that is still in the all-in model that we started with elementary this fall, and the hybrid model at the secondary level on a weekly rotating basis. And you can see here from this first slide that I have, these are our MREA or MAP, MREA, NWEA MAP scores in math from last fall to this fall. And just a quick look at this pie chart can show you that in the area that is purple in color, which is the high level, we are seeing a little bit of a drop from 18.7% to 13.6%. And as we go into the blue section of the pie chart, which is the high average, you see a slightly less amount of a drop, but we're still seeing a bit of a drop in our student performance. Our average, which is green, is growing a bit, and that's something we don't want to see. And our low average is growing some more from left side to the right side. And our low in red is growing a little bit as well. If you take a look at the next slide, that's reading. And that pretty much shows the same thing. We're seeing a bit of a slide in the purple or high color, almost equal amount, 0.1% in the blue, the high average. Our average in green, not too much of a slide. And our low average actually went down this year compared to last year, but our low in red went up a bit. So we're seeing a little bit of a slide in reading too, but not that much. It's a little bit more telling on the next slide, which has bar charts that I can show you. And that is a comparison on the left side. You will see a math comparison, grades 1 through 5. We did not test our kindergartners this year, or we did, but we're not presenting them in this report because there could be no slide with kindergarten. But comparing math from last fall to this fall, our numbers aren't that bad. We're seeing a little bit of a slide, but not much. That's, the bad news we thought, or is that we're seeing a bit of a slide until we get to about 4th and 5th grade, and then we're holding pretty steady. The same is true for the reading on the right side. You can see a drop in 1st grade, 2nd grade, 3rd grade, and 4th grade, and then in 5th grade, we actually grew. So the good news is that we're not seeing the slide that we expected to see. However, as we analyze this and discuss this in our district, we realize that there is one significant consideration we have to factor in. And that is the fact that due to the fact that we're still waiting for 2,000 Chromebooks, we have not been able to include in our MAP testing those students who are on the full-time distance learning model. So those students will tell a completely different story when we do test them, and we think that we will probably see a bit more of a drop when we can finally get around this winter to testing those students. But all in all, when you consider the fact, and Fred pointed this out to me earlier today, that when we had our students for the better part of a quarter, all of our students in distance learning last year, and then again now this fall, we are seeing a much smaller drop in our test score results than we expected. And so that's good news, and we're really pleased about that. But we're being very cautiously pleased about that, and expecting perhaps to see further issues down the road as this year progresses. But we hope we can remediate them as they come along. On the next couple of slides, I want to point out some of the concerns that were shared with me from both the elementary and the high school level. At the elementary level, we are concerned, and many teachers are providing anecdotal evidence that distance learning students are falling behind, if not only academically, but also in terms of engagement. And that engagement is a precursor to what we're expecting to perhaps see in terms of academic problems down the road. We have attendance concerns with the distance learning model. And what this means is not so much that students aren't logging in, but that they're disengaged while they are logged on and perhaps playing games. We're not always in front of the screen. And we're finding also that for distance learning, even if they're there, many of those students are not submitting their homework. And we're trying to figure out how to get around that problem. And we're definitely seeing mental health and behavioral concerns. The behavioral concerns are more disengagement, not acting out, but disengagement at the elementary level. And that picture kind of sums it up pretty well. My last slide today is a little bit about secondary level concerns. Again, we're seeing that the distance learning students are not as engaged as those students who are on the hybrid model because they probably figure they won't see their teachers all year. And again, they're logging on, but not necessarily submitting their work or staying engaged. Our sixth grade student failure rates are anticipated to be higher than usual. We're at the end of our first term now, our first quarter, more sixth graders are failing in terms of D's and F's in their quarter grades than we're used to seeing in previous years, and that's a concern. Sixth grade is part of our middle school, which is secondary here in Bemidji. We have about 60 students who are totally MIA at the secondary level. We're trying to track them down. They haven't registered. We can't find them in any other district, and we're trying to locate them still. That number was over 200 at the beginning of the year, so we've narrowed that down, but we're still looking. And finally, we are concerned that our graduation rate is at risk and that it might drop by 2 or 3 percentage points at the high school this year. So we've got a lot of work to do. We're dealing with a lot of concerns. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. I'm Randy Quall. I'm the elementary principal here in Mora. I've been in different roles over the last 10 years, at different administrative roles over the last 10 years. Mora Elementary has about 850 students pre-K through 6th grade. So thank you for having me today. My first slide is talking about our fall FAST results. We tested all of our students that were in person. We were able to be in person until September 28th. We have about 100 students at the elementary level that are flex learners, about 14 to 15 per grade on average. And we were able to test 60 out of those 100 students during the evenings. We were really proud that the parents were able to come in like that. And we have about 50 new homeschool students this year. So the results are missing a few students, but overall we did a pretty good job of capturing all the students that were with us last year. We have, you can see from the top graph there, our first grade fall FAST results were 426. And what we did was we tried to find the median score for the last 5 years. And that score was 436 for the fall. So we had almost a 10-point drop in our kindergartners from last year going into first grade this year, which was pretty significant. It was very similar for our second grade, and we did the median average for the last 5 years for all the grades that we had that for. Second grade was a little bit unique. Every school has those grades that are high performers and maybe that are lower performers. That would be our second grade this year. So those results are a little skewed there too. On the other end, we do have high performing grades when we look at this from the sky view, and that was our third grade last year. So they actually, beginning of this year for fourth grade, they're 1 point ahead of our norm. we took into consideration what would they have been had we not had distance learning in the spring. Would they have been 8 or 9 points above what our expected scores were? If I skip down to the math there at the bottom, our primary, so when I look at the reading, our scores were really affected at the primary level. Our kindergarten last year, our first grade last year, we're trying to do as many scripted interventions on the days that we have them present as possible. When I look at the math, there was a little bit of a surprise there. All of the grades were affected, but we actually had our 5th grade and 6th grade that were the most affected. And we tried to analyze that for both subjects. Teachers are awesome. We need them at that primary reading level, and that at the math level with 5th and 6th grade, when we start to transition to algebraic expressions and all those higher level concepts, parents are really struggling with those concepts at home, and students did the best that they could. So our math scores were really affected at the 5th and 6th grade level, and our reading scores were really affected at the last year's kindergarten and 1st grade level, this year's 1st and 2nd grade. The good news is on those graphs, we're ahead of the national norm, but we're behind what we've been used to at the local level. You can go to the next slide there. So what we tried to do was really look at what intervention strategies could we maintain, and how could we help those students that have been struggling. When we transitioned to the hybrid model September 28th, we immediately went to interventions of double doses for our most vulnerable population. They attended the A days on Monday and Tuesday, our DCD students, and they also attended the B days on Thursday and Friday on 5-day weeks. And then we began working with food service, working with transportation to set up bus routes for our next tier students that we wanted to add interventions to. And that was our LD students and our neediest title students. And we set up 90-minute instruction blocks for our title students and 120-minute instruction blocks for our SPED. The SPED was for K through 6, and we focused our title groups K through 3. And on October 21st, we started that double dose on Wednesdays, and we had 100 students coming in to the building in different waves, so to speak, throughout the day. That has gone really well. We talked about expanding that and really looking at how we could improve those intermediate math scores. So on November 4th, we started bringing in 4th, 5th, and 6th grade students to focus on some of those harder math skills. And then we added to our 1st grade and 2nd grade title groups. And now we're pushing about 140 students coming in on our off distance learning day of Wednesday. So that's gone really well. My assistant principal has done a great job at coordinating all those. And we've gotten a lot of positive feedback from the parents that we're working with. And again, transportation has done an incredible job of coordinating all those bus routes. One of the things that we're working on is we're trying to explore ways to improve some high school interventions. I know Tim mentioned attendance and grades. We have a lot more Fs, probably 400% more failing grades at the high school. So we're exploring on what we can do there on Wednesdays to help address those needs at the high school level. And at the elementary level, one other area that we had concerns on and we want to improve some interventions was the enrichment. A lot of our enrichment students are losing some of the lessons that they always had in person. So we're working on some evening enrichment classes for our high flyers and trying to get that into place for December. Just elementary testimonials. They've been really impressed in our hybrid model with the focus and the engagement of our students overall. There's just not a lot of redirecting. They're making great progress on the days that we have students present. Our discipline referrals are less than 10% of what we normally have in a school year. So the teachers are doing a great job with managing all the things that they're juggling every day, but the students are really focused when they're here and really even better than we expected. For the progress, we're really happy to say that most of this Kayla Thor is a math teacher. She usually gets through 4 full math lessons in a week. She's getting through 2 to 3 lessons per week, and she said it's pretty close to 3 without having to worry about what they're doing at home. So 3 lessons in the 2 in-person days that were present. Some of the concerns are also what Tim mentioned, trying to get students caught up when they have been absent, or dealing with some of those attendance issues that are issues for us across the state. The next testimonial just talks about how this hybrid and distance learning has really helped our grade levels focus together and work together more than we ever have. I think we've done a good job in the past, but this is really laser-like. We've tried to make sure that grade levels and teachers in those grade levels have the same message, have the same assignments, so that there's no confusion with any parents or students. It's also, the first 3 weeks gave us an opportunity to teach students Google Classroom, Google Meets, Google Forms, and that's helped our teachers really give immediate feedback right away for the assignments that the students have done. The next one, 4th grade, is also talking about how well they've been able to work together as a team and how they've been really able to push aside unnecessary lessons and focus on what is really needed. What is the guaranteed and viable lesson plans that we have to focus on while they're in school and present? What's the most important for us all? The high school has struggled at times. There's some worry from our math department on what this looks like as it compounds over the years. Hopefully it's that 12 to 14 months that was mentioned earlier, so we can move on to post-COVID education again. But there was also positives that were noted on that. And the skill set that students will learn from COVID-19 and this pandemic, and how will that help us in the future, because there are pros and skills that we'll use here on out. Thank you for letting me have the opportunity to speak here, and have a great day.
Well, thank you, Randy. That's, great data and excellent interventions, and the testimonials from the teachers really gives us a view at the ground level. And so thanks for doing all this work and being with us today.
No problem.
Okay. Andy, over in East Central.
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. I hope this call finds you doing well and enjoying the sunny weather and the beautiful weekend that we have coming up. As we dive into the current situation in East Central, I'll just start with some positive things before we talk maybe about some less positive things. We are finding, as we're in a distance learning model, that our distance learning program is way better than it was last spring, and I just think that's a testament to the work that our staff has done to boost their skills professionally in the last few months. There's nothing better than probably professional development out of necessity, and I think that's what we're finding here, is that our people have had to boost their skills. And a big shout out to our staff for the skills they've built that are going to serve us well for many years to come. So a big thank you to them. As Randy said too, student behavior has been much better. Now we're in a distance learning model, but on those in-person days that we left a few weeks ago, we have found our behavioral referrals to be far less than what they've been, prior to COVID. And so we're thankful for that, and our kids have responded well. The current situation in Pine County continues to get worse. If you participated in the governor's call today, you heard Jan Malcolm say that rural Minnesota COVID cases are skyrocketing as compared to the metro. And as she said that, I felt like she was talking to us in Pine County today, because this is what we continue to look at. I've told our local public health department that when they get nervous, then the school district should get nervous. And I can tell you right now, public health in Pine County is quite nervous. So our current case rate number that was published yesterday is 35.7 per 10,000. And as I've mentioned on this call before, we have a prison in our school district. If you remove those cases, it's at 30. As we look to next week, right prior to this meeting, we had a kind of a new calculation put together, and we predict next week will be 53.95. And there's far less prison cases to talk about, so that really will be not a factor anymore in Pine County. And so we have some very growing concerns in this part of Minnesota. Personally, I have concerns, especially because we are a prime location for many deer hunters coming up to us this weekend. So there'll be quite a few folks coming into our county with a lot of cases locally and a lot of deer camps taking place. I'm nervous about that. Our current learning model is distance learning district-wide, and we are going to be in that at least until November 13th. And as you look at that case rate number, there's potential for us to maintain that distance learning model maybe through Thanksgiving. So superintendents in Pine County are having a lot of daily conversations about what that looks like. As of just a few minutes ago, we currently have 17 staff members in quarantining. And 8 positive cases of COVID-19 within our school system, and 45 students on quarantine, but not 1 case in the kids as of right now, and that can change quickly. As we all know, leading schools, one of the most controversial things we're facing is what to do with athletics. You know, we can change the math curriculum, we can change reading. We don't get a lot of calls about that, but when it comes to sports, the phone rings off the hook. So we are hoping to get our kids in volleyball and football back next week, so we can get those last games in to finish out our season, especially to give those seniors those last opportunities to participate, because we just feel strongly that we need to find a way to give them those last moments of their high school careers. So we're going to try to do that next week. All right, as we look at some of the data as it relates to loss of learning and what the impact has been with COVID-19, we are fortunate enough to be members of the St. Croix River Education District. If you've ever heard of SCRED, they are a state and national leader when it comes to testing and assessment and intervention with learning. So we're very fortunate to be a part of that group of 6 school districts. So they pull this data together for us, and they lead us through our assessment windows. So you read these graphs both horizontally and vertically. And so if we look at our East Central Elementary A reading scores, and let's just take kindergarten as an example, starting in 17-18 and going across to the right, you know, we went from 61% to 52 to 43 to 39. And so, again, this is not the same kids, this is grade level. And so as we go across there, you do see a dip in kindergarten. And it's very similar when you read it that way, when you come down. So by grade level, we're seeing a dip in some of our learning. But if you track this by color, that is cohorts of students. And we're seeing less of a drop when we look at it by cohorts of students. And that's good news. Less of a drop, but we're also seeing less gain. And so I think that's a real key piece there, that we're not seeing the drop we expected, but we're also not seeing those hopeful gains that we've been pushing for all these years. And so this is very helpful for us as we message this to our community and as we message this to our staff, that what they're doing is working and intervening with their kids is working. And we need to continue to do those things. So go ahead. I also included the SCRED-wide, the 6 school districts that make up the SCRED schools. We always compare with each other to see if there's pockets of really positive things happening that we can replicate, or pockets of things that we really need to dive into to try to correct as we look at a collection of 6 school districts. And you'll see it's a similar story here. It's less of a drop in student learning, but not quite the gains that we're really hoping for. And so I think it's a sign of what's to come. And I'll talk a little bit more about that when it comes to our specific schools coming up. In our high school, it's important to note that I didn't include the high school assessments because we switched assessments last spring. We were planning to give the Fast Bridge assessment to our 7th and 8th graders, but of course, with COVID in the spring, we actually chose not to test the kids because the logistics of that were a big problem, and so we did not conduct that test. And when we did it this fall, it's 1 data point, so we have not included that here. But I think it's important to talk, when we look at high school kids, to look at some of our more kind of boots on the ground, kid by kid data, and that's student attendance. There is a learning minutes issue that we have right now with some of our attendance data. So if you look at 2019 and 20, from the start of the school year to October 29th, we had 132 unexcused absences with our high school kids. And as we look at this year, a similar time frame, the first day of school to October 29th, we have 555 unexcused absences. A key piece of information, though, is that 47 kids are considered full-time distance learners. They account for the majority of our unexcused absences. That means that they haven't signed into their Zoom calls, they're not turning in work regularly, similar things to what Maura and Bemidji had talked about as well. Those kids are just absent from learning more often than they should be, and it's accounting for a significant loss in learning minutes in our high school. In our elementary school, some of our more anecdotal data as we talk to teachers, the data is not showing a significant loss yet. I think that's really important, though. We're still at the beginning stages of what learning loss is going to look like. And I think it's really important that we talk to our staff to say, what are they feeling compared to other years? And our teachers are saying that, especially in the upper elementary grades, that our kids are just not as rehearsed as they were, especially when it comes to math facts and some of those repetition style things that have really boosted skills as they track through the grades. And so they're attributing that to a lack of practice and a lack of time in front of their teachers. Another thing they're talking about is the lack of stamina in learning in our kids. You know, as we all know, when you start school, you have those first weeks of training kids, right? The routines and the structures and everything that we do. And that is really upset at this time. And so that stamina for learning is really lacking in our kids and probably lacking in our parents too, because a lot of it is falling back on parents. So we have to refocus on what it means to be a good learner, especially in a distance learning or hybrid model. What does that really mean to be a good learner? And we've talked about how do you set up your home for learning? How do you set up, bedrooms and desks and those kind of things? And that's a really key piece right now. There's a whole grit issue that needs to be talked about with kids and parents and educators. We have to push through on this and make sure that we're still trying to get after it. Take care of ourselves, but continue to push forward. And a major issue that we see coming is alignment with our scope and sequence and how that sets up against our Minnesota standards. There's going to be gaps, and there's going to be spots where we are not able to vertically align and step through the curriculum as it aligns to the assessments. And we just feel strongly that although we're not seeing a big dip in learning yet, that is right around the corner. And that's some of the more anecdotal information from our elementary teachers. Thank you.
Well, Andy, I appreciate the data and the way you displayed it so you can track the cohort or go across or go down. And you're right, you're seeing learning loss, but not as much. And I was very impressed with your insights from your staff on what's going on. So great summary from all 3 schools. Neil, what have you got to share from the university?
Well, a couple things. One, this is more for taking a little broader look at some of the educational outcomes and costs. Thomas Friedman and Michael Mandelbaum wrote a book several years ago about That Used to Be Us. And if you look at chapter 6, it focuses on the economics of education, and it highlights the same group that Fred Nolan was talking about, the loss. And then in that case, they were just looking at the economic disparities and the loss in billions of dollars of, it was up to about $500 billion worth of lost GDP due to poor education and these people in the lower economic groups. And now we throw in the loss that we're going to have associated with the pandemic, and it becomes vitally important that we do our best to figure out how we can stop the losses. And I really appreciate that all the superintendents in this program are really on top of it and trying to do everything they can to turn the ship around, or at least plug up the holes that we have where people aren't performing. But it's not a pleasant read, but it's a sobering read. So if you have a chance to read chapter 6, I think it will at least steel you for the problems that are coming ahead. The other two books are ones that I've read because I also do some teaching outside of my normal responsibilities. And I've tried to figure out creative ways to get my students to learn things. And the two books that I found that were rather entertaining was one was called Teach Like a Pirate. And that was a guy that really wanted to make his classes memorable. And another one was taught by a elementary school superintendent or principal, and his was end of molasses classes. So what can you do to make things interesting? And if teachers or administrators want to take a look at these, they might be something that could at least give them another idea, or say, well, maybe we could approach it slightly differently. And let's, you know, as we've been talking about, we need to be ready to fail, but maybe we can possibly come up with something that will help with engagement, because it's a really difficult situation that we're working in. Next. So I've been taking a lot of online classes, and one of the best that I took was on chronic pain management. It's taught by Dr. James Frickton. He is both a dentist and also an anesthesiologist at the University of Minnesota. Really excellent course, and I would highly recommend it if you want to. It's for free. It's on Coursera. So that would be one to look at for an excellent design in course management. The other one was, there's a company, the teaching company called, and they produced the great courses. And this one in everyday engineering was outstanding. And it was his ability to do classroom demonstrations. And it was all video. In other words, we're doing it online or through video instruction. But I found his engagement to be outstanding, and some very simple demonstrations that he used to help really give concrete understanding of the basic principles that they're trying to work through. And I think this may also, if some people want to do it, may trigger some ideas as far as how to approach this new learning environment that we're working in, and give them the opportunity to say, hey, maybe we can make this a little more interesting, or maybe we can do our best to even get these principles through. So next. And now for the sobering part. I watched an interview with Anthony Fauci, and he was saying that when we were having 40,000 cases per day in October, and he was saying, I'd really like to get it down to 10,000. Well, now we're running at about 120,000 cases per day. So we're about 3 times higher than we were in October, and it doesn't look like it's slowing down yet. And if we look at the map, it's rather depressing, it's particularly in the Midwest, upper Midwest, that we really got very, very high case rates. So that's a sobering situation, because Anthony Fauci, when we were at 40,000 per 100,000, he was really concerned about holidays and how we were going to manage it. And now we're at 3 times that level. So I think all of us need to really give a sobering assessment about how we handle events where there are people congregating inside without masks. And if you have people that are at high risk, it may be something to be thoughtful about and say, well, maybe we should not meet in person this year and maybe save those times for when it's safer to be together, because now is not the time to be cavalier about it, especially if you're in a situation where you're eating together and people from different areas are coming together and you do not have your masks on. So just something to think about, something to be thoughtful about, because we want to make it to 2021. We really do. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Neil. That's some great resources, and it's certainly a sobering map there. Well, Todd, you've got a great example of communications, and you're always stressing talk about learning. So what can you share from the communications point of view?
Well, thanks, Fred. It's been interesting to listen to this because there's been some rather sobering news, particularly on where the cases are right now in rural districts. And it was interesting that as we were going through some of the educational data and also some of the data on the cases, that several times I'm hearing that phrase, share with the community. In other words, the superintendents and administrators who we're listening to here know that whether the news is good or bad, it's important that you're sharing with the community what's happening inside the schools. In most of the places where we work, the school is one of the one or two most important touchstones of the community. People are going to pay attention to what goes on there. And it's critical for you to talk about what's happening in your schools, because as we talked about before, if you don't, others will step in, probably with insufficient information, and they will try to tell the story for you. You don't want that. So with the educational successes, but also the challenges you have, even the discipline problems, the stakeholders in your school district are going to be talking about it because they experience it every day. And that's why it's important for you to step up and be transparent with the community about what's happening. Talk about what you're seeing in the schools. But most importantly, when you are seeing something that's a challenge, make sure you're talking about how you're dealing with it, what your plan for going forward is. And don't forget the simple messages that give people confidence in what you're doing. Andy said it was almost a throwaway, I thought maybe, but he was saying that, we are doing better than we did last spring. You might not remember to tell people that, but it's critical. They need to know that your teachers have put the effort in that's necessary to make sure that they're able to deal with any student achievement problems. They are going to step forward with interventions and work with those students. And I appreciate Andy just throwing that in there because it's a really important message to get out there at times like this. Now, as we go forward, we're going to hit the winter. People are going to be closed up just a little bit more. There are also going to be another month or 2 months or 3 months that goes by, and they're going to get more and more fatigued with COVID. And one of the things that's going to start happening is that if you haven't already, you're going to start getting it from both sides. That is, there'll be one group of people who say, look at what's going on with the students. We've got to get everybody back to the schools. And hey, there's no transmission in schools anyway, right? And then another side's going to say, well, you've got to do everything you can to protect the students. And I can't imagine you'd ever let students go back in school. Now, my question is, how do you ever walk the line between those two? And just a few little ideas for how you communicate when you have both sides, each one talking in a different ear about how they think you should be running the schools. First, acknowledge that there are differences in opinion at all times. It's important that you recognize that both sides have a strong opinion and respect that opinion is valid, even if it's not reflecting exactly how the district is operating. Secondly, also acknowledge that there's going to be no answer here that's going to be perfect in terms of balancing health and education, because that's really what you're doing here. You're trying to make sure the kids get educated and their health is protected, but there is no perfect answer because there are still going to be cases and there will still be instances when students aren't able to keep up because of distant learning. Third, remind people that no decision is permanent, that the district is constantly reacting to what's happening in the community, to the guidance you're getting from the state, and from your own understanding of what's happening with the local public health. And remind people that a decision that's being made right now, maybe to change a model, may change back again based on the data you're receiving. Fourth, remind the community that they can help you. As simple as things as wearing masks more frequently, practicing social distancing, practicing great hygiene, and making sure that people stay home when they have symptoms. Those four things make an incredible difference. And sometimes it just helps for somebody else in the community other than public health or maybe your local mayor to just step up and say, remember, you're helping students and staff when you take those four simple steps. And finally, ask people to keep giving feedback. And that doesn't mean you always want it, I understand that, but it's an important part of your long-term engagement with your community to encourage that feedback to come to you so you understand exactly the depth and seriousness of the concerns that they have. I think most, at least of the districts that I've worked with, have come to value asking for that feedback as opposed to waiting for a small firestorm to emerge in the community. Overall, the questions aren't going to slow down, and they're certainly not going to become consistent. Different people will have different opinions, and it's important that you're able to get both sides to understand that while they may not agree with what you're doing, you do have the situation under control. Fred?
Thank you, Todd. Again, that's just great advice. And Aaron, I don't see any questions in the chat window. But before I turn it back to Arif for the panelists and for our attendees, 2 weeks from now will be our 15th and final COVID Convo in the series. And panelists, I'd like you to reflect on the last 6 months or 9 months since March, and what takeaways do you have? And what do you think, how do you think education is going to change moving forward? I think one of you mentioned that Zoom conferences for IEP conferences are like, yeah, this is the way to go. It's much easier to schedule them. And so think about those things that we're going to want to continue after the pandemic, that you've learned, the new skills that people have learned, as Andy talked about. So that's kind of the focus, as well as good news and what the current numbers are and your current learning models as well. So I want to thank all panelists and all attendees, and Arif, it's on to you.
Sure. Hey, thanks a lot, and thanks for the presentation. I think it's very helpful. The one thing I think we probably should focus on at the next COVID Convo is one way or the other, I think we'll have a general idea about where the country is going in terms of election. And I think it's time for us to pull some of the data that's out there in terms of the potential stimulus packages that will be coming. Funding is going to be a big issue here for school districts, municipalities, cities, and counties. There's no way around it. There's a massive funding gap, even at state level. And as you know, we have multiple lobbyists that help us kind of work through and give us information in terms of what the feeling is in DC, but also in the state. And I think that you are going to see a stimulus package come that is going to impact not only school districts, but a lot of public sector. What we've looked at is both of those stimulus packages, one from the Republican side and one from the Democratic side at the federal level. They both are pretty significant. You know, they both propose different things, but one of them is really focused on small business support as you move forward, which is a Republican package, and a Democratic package is heavily focused on state, municipal, and K-12 to provide some additional funding resources. There's no way around it. Even if there is a shutdown, even if there is a shutdown of certain states or shutdown of certain parts of the country, I think one thing we've all learned is schools are not going to be shut down. And I'm going to use an example of England. England went to a complete shutdown, but the one area they kept open was schools, because they figured out that there's a way to manage schools, there's a way to deliver education, there's a way to have a hybrid model, there's a way, because again, you've seen the data, it's extremely important that kids learn, because if they don't learn, we're actually failing them for the future. So I think it's extremely important to do that. So I just let you guys know that we are going to be working on a little bit more in-depth information. So we're going to have to, we'll have to see how this all works out and how, you know, exactly how the stimulus packages will work, but there's no way around it. I mean, we have a massive funding gap. I think somebody has said in the state of Minnesota, we're going to look at potentially a deficit of, I don't know, 2 to 3 billion is what I've heard. Maybe it's higher than that. And if you look at the fact that we had a positive, a surplus of almost 1.6 billion, that's almost a $5 billion turnaround. So there's no way around it. I think it's time to kind of refocus our efforts on funding and really try to push some of those things moving forward. The other thing is just mention to everybody, please, if you can, join us on the this last COVID Convo, where we'll provide some additional funding information, financial information. We won't know the actual what's exactly going to happen, but at least lay out some of the plans that are being proposed and out there. So with that, thank you for attending, and hope to see you in 2 weeks. Take care, everyone. Have a good weekend.